But anyway, welcome. My name's Kyle Laws, and I hang out here at the gallery. They're very, very nice to me. They give me a space to put a table once a month, and I sell books. And this is the second time we've done a cooperative venture where I've had a release here. So, please, a warm thank you to Steel City Artworks for what they do for the community and poets. All right, this book has an interesting history. I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction so that you can have a sense and a background for the book, because the book, in terms of the poetry, dives right into the subject. So unless you read sort of the introduction, you could be a little head scratching. But anyway, Faces of Fishing Creek is a novella in poems in the voices of two characters, Clara and Joseph, who developed an isolated section of southern New Jersey as a summer resort for Philadelphia residents. And you'll hear their voices throughout the reading. They sort of, between the two of them, have a running discussion about the subject. The precursor to Fishing Creek was Town Bank, that was established about 1685 on the shores of the Delaware Bay for the industry of offshore whaling. And for those of you who don't know what offshore whaling is, it wasn't the Moby Dick go out into the middle of the sea, hunt for whales, but the whales actually came into the Delaware Bay and they went out into tiny little boats the size of lifeboats with harpoons and would harpoon the whale, and then they went for quite a wild ride until the whale was exhausted. Anyway, so it was, to say that it was hard work is probably the understatement. Anyway, abundant fish, which actually brought the whales into the Delaware Bay, because all these estuaries fed into the bay, and the estuaries produced all the small fish and crustaceans in their early stages. And there probably are about 10 creeks that flow right into the Delaware Bay. But anyway, the fish, which brought the whales, was touted in advertisements by the people that developed the town with a notation that the community was restricted to the white race. I grew up in the Villas, which is the name of the town that survived, in the 1950s and 1960s. And I did not know until a few years ago that the deed for every lot sold until 1958 contained that covenant. So what I did is I went back and did a lot of research, and I looked at almost all of the deeds, which there were a lot of them. But anyway, it was an interesting project. At times it would, if I was there too long, I would get upset and I would kind of go up and confront them, about, how could you have let this go on for so long? But anyway, so that's the scoop. The covenants restricting race were outlawed by the Supreme Court in 1948, and these covenants continued until the death of the prime developer until 1958. So he did it for 10 years after it was outlawed by the Supreme Court. That's the background. Two characters, Clara and Joseph. Clara, Bates, descendant of whalers, sells me the first section of Fishing Creek after Joseph's failure at Woodbine, 1926. Bates thinks I travel to this village like the tide over sandbars, a long distance between high and low, coming from Odessa to be a mask for Wildwood villas. My name on the first tract, each lot sold by my husband with a covenant restricting use to the white or Caucasian race. I beg Joseph not to write the deeds that way, as breezes blow across the mud flats that smell of weekies, blues, and flounder that will jump onto any baited hook. I become a perpetual nag, a hag, while his brochures extol the high ground of once plantations, advertise bungalows with 4 rooms and a porch, outdoor plumbing, artesian water, and a lot, all as low as $300, payments taken. We all wish we had bought something back then, right? Clara. Anna Akhmotova was born 1889 in Odessa, Ukraine. And those of you who are not poets, Anna Akhmotova was the primary Russian poet of the 20th century. Odessa, where Joseph and I meet shopping for lace on a narrow street, tops of buildings where shopkeepers sleep, leaning to each other as trees. I carry a book of Anna's poems. Joseph says I can take her with me if I will leave. He will bring Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, and they will write to each other on mornings washed by a sea like the quartz they call diamonds gathered at Sunset Beach. Joseph writes of darkest Wildwood, 1927. What I know of women, I learned from Pushkin. What I know of Clara is that she's become Olga and Tatiana, Onegin and Lenski, characters Tchaikovsky made into opera, and they never end happily. She is one for whom dawn rises as spring catapults to summer, as horseshoe crabs make their way to lay eggs in the sand, as she carries sheaves of poetry to the hull of a cabin cruiser wrecked and washed up in a March nor'easter. She will never attach to the shore in the way she did her beloved Odessa, never attached to me as a wife should to husband. Her attraction to lost ships hides an unhappiness with the place I've named Wildwood. To all the world a success, but we silent and unsatisfied. Clara, New Year's Day, 1928. My brother whispers with Joseph in the dining room, heads bent over the blonde mahogany table and a plaque of the lots of Wildwood villas. I mix drinks in the kitchen from the Canadian Club, brought in on Gabby's outboard, the one used to pick up shipments intercepted by the Coast Guard. Same guardsmen who drink at the saloon where Gabby tends bar, where they talk about where cargo is dumped over drinks. He serves them the same bootleg whiskey they think destroyed by the winter rough of Bay. We pretend we don't know, but do. We think we've changed, but have not. We think this new world is different from the old. We think the waters of May we dip in before the flush of those escaping the cities purifies us. We think this covenant restricting use to the Caucasian race is somehow not wrong. Somehow the harbor of liberty we sailed through on our way here. Clara, returning to Stream, 1933. The consolidated school in Cold Spring needs a French and German teacher. I have applied. I will ride to school with the children of town if Joseph cannot find me a car. It's that or I have to leave. I know this is his dream, and I thought it was mine too, an Odessa in America. But this is no cosmopolitan port city where I learned languages from across the world. Skellinger landing sailors stumble on their English tongues as if the language were not their own. I prefer the whistle at noon that reminds me it's Wednesday. And it's time I stopped having these thoughts, because I might convince myself I do not belong, and I do. I was meant to be here from the first time I saw Joseph on that crowded city street. My feet have learned these tide lines as if born in the estuary of Fishing Creek, as if I swam out into the bay with my first blood, as if I were a salmon returning to stream. Clara, this likely too will fail, 1933. He spoke of the summer, and he also said that for a woman to be a poet was absurd, and that's an epigraph from Anna Akhmatova. I am chattering as a crow in early morning, or sparrows in the pine at dusk. Out of nowhere, Joseph says that for a woman to teach German and French is absurd, as if he's been reading Anna. I snap back that it's not the depression slowing sales, but his own bad luck. This development likely too will fail, as Woodbine did, not that long ago or far as the kestrel wings across creeks. I do this in both German and French, not sure if he can follow. At least they're going to pay me, I shout as I slam the door. He afraid of losing me afraid teaching won't work. Joseph seeking asylum, 1935. Mornings I rise late, Clara already gone to school. I find her letters on the kitchen table, letters we write to each other every day, even though we could as well talk. They are in French, a language she writes better than Russian. I pull the dictionary hidden in a drawer under the table because she asked to see translations in both Russian and English. I am her best student, the one to whom she can write what she cannot say, what she cannot be on a peninsula at the end of a state, at the end of a journey. We, pilgrims seeking a silence in the quiet of trees. Joseph writes, Before Dawn, 1936. My Clara awakens before dawn when she hears the rustle of the fox, when the first gulls begin to call, when men untie their boats from poles as the tide moves in. As if floating in the mouth of the bay where salt balances fresh, she arches her back and stretches to welcome the day. This how she welcomes me, to the clatter of a fishing village about its work as if nothing has changed in 200 years. Waters where whalers once hunted from boats as small as those used to rescue the errant from undertows. But Clara knows the currents well enough to swim at the edge of sleep, and I have learned to embrace what fades like a moon as the sun rises through leaves. Clara writes, Winter's First Heart Freeze, 1939. The willow spreads its transparent fan. Perhaps I should not have become your wife. Epigraph from Anna Akhmatova. Not willow, but mimosa, on sides of an unpaved Delaware Parkway named in the first deed. Not champagne and orange juice served on Sunday, but pink fronds on Wednesday. This, our recreation of a bathing resort on the Black Sea. This, what you promised. What I have come to love more than our union. How could I have known there'd be something in the night breeze, something that would come between, something more than our children I will leave, something that could be faith, the way the wind sweeps up the bay in row upon row of frozen waves as far as I can see, as if a god's hand stopping them from their fall. I don't think I read this one, but I think I skipped over it, so I'm going to go back a little bit. Clara, White Sparrow, 1933. I haven't told Joseph, but tomorrow I will drive to White Sparrow to find a maid, someone to cook, clean, and care for our daughters while I work. Consolidated School has hired me. I laugh when I hear my oldest in conversation with a neighbor who asks what religion we are, and she replies, Consolidated. I like her answer. Here it is your school who defines who you are. It's a barb in my husband's side for me to hire a black maid, but there's so little I know about the people who once were slaves. White Sparrow, named after one of Booker T. Washington's lawyers, was designed for Southern blacks to escape persecution, but also for workers in the hotels and boarding houses of local resorts. And if I'm Akhmotova and Joseph is Pushkin, I want to understand those whom we've excluded from Wildwood villas, and a country that would have Pushkin, descended of an African prince, live in a town called White Sparrow. Joseph writes, Fishing Creek, 1940. A year since Clara's death, sudden, inexplicable, a turn of season told by the change in light. She woke with a pain in the night, cramped in our bed, called out as I smoked a cigar on the porch. I got her to the car where she lay in the back seat while we roared around curves of dirt roads, crossed Delaware River Bridge to arrive at Jefferson Hospital, but her appendix had burst on some unpaved Indian trail, poison flowing through her body like effluent from the filling mill where they process the wool of sheep, where I walked the woods of Fishing Creek, as if in the dens of oaks Clara might appear. Joseph, Courthouse Diner, 1940. One of the funny thing about towns there, and I did a riff on it on a companion book I have here called This Town. They would name towns town. Well, Pueblo is Spanish for town, so I've lived in several towns called town anyway. But anyway, Courthouse is the name of a city, but it was where the courthouse was, so they called it Courthouse. Anyway, so it's kind of funny when you see that, but Courthouse Diner is not actually in the courthouse, but it's in the town of Courthouse. Courthouse Diner, 1940. I sit in the same section every morning, talk to the waitress as if I'm talking to Clara, tell her my plans for the day, how the construction is going. She's begun to make suggestions. She knows my children's names, asks how they're doing in school. I've offered the house, larger than we need, to begin a hospital. If one had been here, Clara might not have died. This place has become my life and her death. If I could take it back, I would. But this is what I know. This is where we began, where our children were born, and where I will die. I will do it as I did before her death, selling to Philadelphians who want to escape to the shore, bringing their fears with them, as if having to live beside those who pick cotton and tobacco in fields is the worst that can happen to them. They never would have survived our revolution, never could have marched with little left of boots across frozen fields, never could survive even a winter of snow on the Delaware Bay. And the last three poems I'll read are an epilogue to the book, and they're my own recollections growing up in a town once known as Fishing Creek. Sand and muck, 1959. In between each sandbar out to low tide, where pearlless oysters grow on the bay, is the black mud that children called muck. The brave ones, the ones used to the debris of tide and the unsettled wings of sandpipers, walk through the valleys that spread black between toes, raise legs as if a dinosaur leaving tracks in ancient riverbeds, place the next foot down into the rise of the ripple in sand. We who live in the villas are used to opposites: the quiet of winter, the hustle of summer, the town of 500 after the season, the resort of 3,000, commercial fishermen and women shucking clams, 2 weeks of vacation when Philadelphia factories shut down for repairs and workers flood cheap rentals. We house, feed in fish shacks, and serve in tap rooms. They cross to the other side of the peninsula for beaches and amusement piers. No one ever swims here. They drive to the ocean, afraid of the muck, the dark between sandbars. Racism, noun, a distinction based on color, 1960. My Irish grandfather plumbed the Philadelphia Seal Test Dairy with black non-union workers. A former boxer striding through picket lines with 2 burly men on either side, knowing there was nothing the picketers could do without being called racist. How a master plumber bid the job, kept costs down, pipes holding up through 5 processing companies and 65 years, although grandfather did not. Stresses and conflicts led to his decline into blindness. He kept it secret that his stepmother was a Native American raised as mulatto in the Carolinas when he retired to a Caucasian-only fishing village on the bay, the least expensive place to live with water views. We played in the white sand that was our front yard under eyes that could no longer distinguish any variation in color, only see the outlines of figures dressed in bright madras shorts as we waved to him in the sun. The story about the black workers always ended with, they all came to the house on Sundays to eat. I still don't know if grandfather was a racist or gave good jobs to labor that was cheapest. The last poem. To Joseph. After reading all the deeds with a covenant restricting use to the Caucasian race, 2013. If I called you segregationist, would you say the flounder with its white flesh is different from the blue with its dark oiliness? If I called you oppressor, would you tell me every policeman, fireman, and machinist in Philadelphia feared losing his job to the migration that started in cotton fields and wound its way north? It was their boil, my salve. If I called you opportunist, would you answer, there were reasons I left a homeland, took a great degree in agriculture at Cornell, drifted south to New Jersey through Vineland with row after row of grapes. There was something about the whalers who became farmers in the sand and bogs I understood. Something about the trees never cleared for 200 years. Something about the oysters that flourished in the murky bay. Thank you for coming.